Thank you so much for taking the time for
Of
the
course.
interview. I just wanted to ask first, I read that when you started editing, you were editing on two linked together VHS tapes, which I think is great.
Yes,
Um,
that's true.
what do you think is like an essential thing for people to know when they start out editing?
What is an essential thing for people to know when they start out editing? Okay, I think the most important thing to remember is that editing is visual storytelling, and the objective of visual storytelling is to create an emotional effect in the audience. That's it. When you're choosing to watch something, you want to experience an emotion. If you're buying a ticket to go and see a movie at the cinema, you choose the film based on the kind of emotion you want to get lost in. And so as the editor of a narrative, say a short film or a feature film or a TV show, your job is to make sure that the visual story that you're telling creates the strongest emotional effect that the director, the writer, the producer is after. You have to tell the best story that exists within the footage that you have, regardless of what was written on the page. Because sometimes when cameras roll, things change. Actors bring delicious texture to lines that you didn't see on the page, or actors aren't as good as you hope. And you, or the structure of the story is not working as well as you hoped once you've sort of put it all together. And you have to ignore what the intention was and say, this is the footage I actually have. And what is the best story that I can tell with this footage? The most emotional story. Yeah, making sure that you think about sound, the soundscape of your film, how you use sound effects, and how you use music to generate that emotional effect in the audience. And if the audience is bored or confused when you show them the film, then you have to listen carefully and re-edit the film to address those problems. Not everyone gets it right, you know, and so if your film's too long or if it's boring or confusing, then you have to use editing to fix that.
Having to work with whatever you have is really helpful. I should have done that on some of my projects. I mean, are there any mistakes that you made in your early career that have shaped how you work
Yes,
now?
that's a very good question. The mistakes that I made are, one, I would usually cut too fast, or I would get impatient with the scene, having seen it too many times, and I'd just try to compress it and make it more and more cutty. And that actually sometimes makes it less emotional. So be aware of cutting too fast. The other thing which I didn't really understand until quite a while into my career is subjective storytelling. Now that means that if you have a choice between a wide shot or a close up of an actor, the close up is going to give you more emotional connection to that character than a wide shot. The wider the camera is, the more information you get. So you see the characters within the space, but you're more objective in your point of view. You know, you're an observer of what is happening, like when you watch a stage play, right? But in a film, story usually is the transformational journey of a human being, right? It's somebody who starts off in one state and learns a lesson and changes and ends in a different emotional state, right? And so the way to do that is to connect the audience emotionally, subjectively with the character, with the protagonist, the lead character. Now, obviously, not every film is like that, but most stories are about a protagonist who changes, you know, with through conflict. And so putting the audience in that character's point of view by cutting from a close up of that character to what that character sees, or the characters that the other characters in the room, that puts you and allows you to connect emotionally with your protagonist, which is really, again, a very strong visual storytelling tool to get the audience more emotionally engaged. Again, which is the only thing that matters, is does the audience feel what you want them to feel? You know, are they emotionally engaged? Are they feeling the emotion that you want to tell them at this point? So subjective storytelling and understanding that is also something that took me a while to really appreciate the power of.
Well, I mean, you said you used to cut too much and cut too quickly. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, you worked on a lot of action films, which have a tendency to have a few quick cuts. I recently rewatched Kingsman and was wondering, how do you edit action sequences with a lot of quick cuts without them feeling messy or disorientating?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. So the secret to an action sequence is the setup. Okay. It's understanding the stakes of the sequence, what the character has to achieve, what our protagonist has to achieve, and what happens if they fail. So you're invested in the outcome. That's the most important thing, is understanding the stakes, the time that they have to do something, all of that. If you've set that up properly, then when the action sequence starts, you'll be like, oh my God, is this person going to live or die? Are they going to succeed? What's going to happen? And you're going to be leaning in and caring about the outcome. Then during the action sequence, geography and clarity is very important. So understanding where the characters are in space, and making sure that what is happening is clear to the audience. So they're not just confronted with a blur. They're confronted with very specific pieces of story that advance the narrative at all times. If you watch Kingsman, we do that. You know, Harry walks to the bar and locks the doors, and you know that these guys are going to try and take him down because they think he's an annoying old man in a pub, and Eggsy is watching him. So there's a lot at stake because it's his pride, and you think he might be overpowered, but then he has got all these amazing spy gadgets, the handcuffs and the umbrella and all that stuff, which is incredibly entertaining to watch him unleash on everybody. And you see the guy's tooth flying out and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But you understand what's happening in the moment at all times, right? So you understand what Harry is doing with the beer glass and hitting the guy on the head, and then the guy gets up with a gun, and then he's got a bulletproof umbrella, and then he switches it to stun and then fires, and the guy does a backflip, all that. You understand what's happening, right? And you're emotionally invested, and you're also playing off the protagonist, Eggsy, so you're seeing his reactions, and you're understanding that he is also as surprised as everyone else is, which is fun because you haven't seen Colin Firth ever do anything like this before. So as the audience, you're also feeling like, holy smokes, what is going on? So that's the main thing, is clarity in geography. And when you cut fast, making sure that each tiny bit of story is landing for the audience moment by moment. If it's too fast, people just don't comprehend what's happening and disengage emotionally, and you want them to understand every shot and to be building the jigsaw puzzle of the story in real time as it's unfolding.
Oh, that scene, because there's so many cuts in that, and there's so much going on, but it always feels clear. So that
Yeah,
does,
and
yeah,
also the way the camera moves is very specific as well to create, again, certain emotional effects of excitement or disorientation in a good way, that kind of thing.
yeah. Another action film that you've done, of course, well, films are the Mission Impossible films, and you obviously did the later ones, which means that you took over a franchise that has already had installments. Did you kind of approach it with your own style, or did you look at what was done before that and then kind of adapt to the way it was edited previously?
When you start to work on bigger budget films where you have the resources to have really great, interesting uses of the camera, you're not in a hurry so much. You can craft the film because you're not just scrambling every day to get the shots, just to scrape the shots to get what you need just to tell the basic story. You have to use less editing tricks in post to fix problems, because the dailies are better quality. So you're not having to kind of fix problems created on the set by a low budget or inexperienced crew who don't really understand how to tell a visual story to a high standard yet, okay? Which is what happens early in your career. You're working with everyone else who's also learning how to do this. But when you get to a level like Mission Impossible, you're working with incredibly experienced professional crews who can craft an emotional visual story in camera with great elegance. And so you don't have to impose anything on the footage editorially. You should remove yourself or any sense of your own personal style. What you should look at is the footage that you have and say, what is the best version of the story that exists here? And the film tells you what it wants to be at that stage. You know, you look at the shots and they're really elegant, beautifully composed shots, and they have an inherent emotional narrative value for a certain length of time. You can kind of feel when the shot comes alive and when it dies emotionally. And so you allow the footage to speak to you and tell you about what is working and what is great in it, and you edit the film that way. But you're always being guided by like clarity and emotion, you know, and confusion and length, because everything on every movie starts out way too long, and then you're always trying to tighten it to the shortest possible version of any scene that is still emotional and comprehensible to the audience. If you over tighten something and it goes by too fast, then none of the emotion lands and everyone just disconnects emotionally. So the film speaks to you, and I just let that is kind of how you work through it. You don't really impose yourself on it at all. You know, it's different when you're editing trailers, or if you're doing social media where you kind of want to create a kind of visual pop. But when you're working on a film like Mission Impossible, you are just allowing the power of the footage to work on its own terms. The editor's job is to lean into that and strengthen it as much as possible and not fight it.
I saw an interview, you talked a lot about, talked a bit about mental health, especially in Hollywood in general, in the film industry. Um, what do you do when you're burnt out or you have like editor's block?
That's a very good question. You need to look after yourself physically. So exercise every day, drink water, don't over caffeinate, you know, try and eat healthy food. You know, if you have a low blood sugar moment around 4 p.m. and you want a bar of chocolate, then great, but don't overdo it. You know, the main thing is look after yourself physically. You know, if you really want to try and be one of the best in the world at this, and it's who can say who the best in the world is? It's very subjective, but it's a good thing to aim for, right? Why not? You know, when I started out wanting to be an editor, I said, why don't I try and be one of the best in the world every day? You wake up and you think, how can I be the best at this particular job that I'm doing now? And that means taking care of yourself physically and emotionally. And it means trying to build time in your day where you can connect with your friends and your family and your partner and your children, whatever. It's very difficult sometimes when, you know, very often I get up before my family is awake and I get home when they're asleep. So I don't even see them, you know, and I'm just working much, much harder. Or I may have half an hour in the evening where I talk to my wife, you know, when I'm really busy on a film. And some days it can be sometimes it can be 7 days a week. Not that often, but because it's very unhealthy to do 7 days a week. You know, 6 is plenty. 5 is better. If you can get 2 days off, proper days off, then that's way better. How to prevent burnout. If you are overwhelmed on a film, or a project, it's quite important to ask for help or ask for another editor to join. If they are shooting hours, like 12 hours of footage a day or whatever, something, or 8 hours, whatever, a nightmare amount of footage, it's probably better to have two editors to help to work through that. It's almost impossible for one person to be awake enough during the day to even kind of to watch it all and start to build something. And that has happened to me, where you think I should be able to do this on my own, and you push through and then you're just exhausted and you burn out and it's a nightmare. So ask for help if you need it. The other thing is, if you have editor's block, right, which again I have had, where you are creatively exhausted because you've just seen the scene 1,000 times and you're like, I have no idea what to do now. There are some things you can do on your own. For example, make the picture black and white, which is kind of just gives you a different visual flavor. You can flop the image, so it's like you're looking at it in a mirror. So drop a flop effect onto it and just watch it all the other way, which will have the same emotional effect, but your eye won't be accustomed to where it's going, and you'll be forced to kind of watch it fresh. Or I always, if I'm stuck, I just invite people into the room, invite my team into the room, or anybody, just to watch what I'm doing and say, does any of this make sense? Does any of this work? If you're really kind of in the weeds with it, that's really important. If you have another editor on the TV show or whatever, then you can just say, hey, come in and look at this, or your assistants. And then what's really important, and I can't really stress this enough, is when you have a version of the story that you feel is kind of going in the right direction, show it to 10 people and pay attention and listen to what they say, and don't bury your head in the sand about problems. Every filmmaker feels like they should be able to know how their movie should come together, but the best filmmakers realize that it means nothing if the audience doesn't react the way that you want them to. And sometimes audiences read stuff into visual stories that you had no intention of being there. The number of times that I've been in a screening and someone has said, wait, aren't those two characters brother and sister? And you're like, whoa, what? How on earth did you think they were brother and sister? And they're like, well, this happened in this scene and this happened in this scene. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I guess that never occurred to me, But now you know that there's confusion and the audience thinks these characters are related when they're not supposed to be. And now you have to go in and look at it. But the best directors understand that this interaction with the audience is really the only thing that matters. And your opinion about what works, or the producer's opinion. So if you have conflicting opinions, like if the director and the editor disagree, try anything you want and then show it to an audience and see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, then you need to keep trying different things. So that's really it with editor's block, is if you show other people and get a reaction, you'll start to feel what to do for the next pass on any sequence.
Turning it black and white, or flipping it that has never occurred to me to do, but that sounds
Give it a go.
incredibly helpful. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I'll do that the next time, because I know the feeling of getting so sick of watching the same thing over and over, and it's just I can't see
Yeah.
anything else. After I struggled a little bit editing my first short on Avid, I just wanted to know, do you have any Avid specific tips, like little things that you've learned on the software over the years?
There's hundreds and hundreds of things that you pick up, and it's all you can do is practice. There is no shortcut to just doing it and building the muscle memory and treating it like it's a musical instrument that you have to practice and learn. And there are no shortcuts, really. You can get fast at any piece of software if you practice enough, and really understand it so that it becomes second nature. And it's the same with any software that you learn on. But the thing about Avid Media Composer is the way it manages media, right, for very large projects is incredibly robust. And everything is, projects open very quickly and bins open very quickly. And on Premiere, when you start getting to very large, complicated timelines, it just crawls and media goes offline and it's just a nightmare. But it's fine for short films and social media posts and YouTube videos, and I get all that. But for large projects with hundreds of hours of footage, it just doesn't work very well. So it is worth persevering, and that's the reason why it keeps leading the charge on these complex, large project movies when there's a lot of people collaborating on the same thing, and you need to trust the software that it's not going to just knock things offline, which happens so often in Premiere, where you just, it loses the link to a file or whatever. So there isn't really any specific Avid tips. It's just you've got to practice and do it every day for 8 to 10 hours a day until you get good at it. That there is no
Mm.
shortcut, unfortunately. You just got to practice.